Everyone to the Progressive Public Caucus. Today is Tuesday, February 21st, and we're really excited to be talking about prison abolition, moratoriums, the future of opportunities instead of incarceration. But before we get into that, I think it would be helpful if we could just do some quick introductions around the table so folks know who's here, and then I can get into some of the leadership notes so we're all on the same page. I will start. I'm Representative Taylor Small from Winooski.
Hello, I'm Representative Troy Hedrick from Burlington, in and around campus, kind of surrounding campus.
Okay, we're just doing introductions now.
Hi, Representative Kate Logan. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm from Burlington, Old North End and downtown.
I'm Representative Kate McCann, and I represent Montpelier.
Brian Chena from Burlington, the old part of the Old North End and most of the East District.
My name is Jana Ossoff, and I am an advocate for the Free Hair campaign.
Awesome. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sorry, jotting down
good.
everyone's affiliations. My name's Sarah. I'm the legislative assistant with the Progressives.
Wonderful. And thank you all for joining here today. So to get us started, just a recap of the leadership notes so you know what to expect this week. It's going to be the same floor times as usual, 10 a.m. today, 1 p.m. 3 p.m. on Wednesday and Thursday, and then 9:30 on Friday. Next week, you will likely see the shift from a 3 p.m. start time to a 1 p.m. start time, depending on bills that are coming out of committee this week. Also, for folks to know, there is a training that is happening at 1 p.m. for public lobbyists and staff on the lockdown drill. I believe that is tomorrow and not today. And you should be expecting an email from Capitol Police regarding that lockdown drill as well. Please be prepared to give some feedback on how that goes, as this will be the first that is happening at the State House. Times, they are a-changing. One other piece that I'll highlight is that House Rules is planning to meet this week. I don't have the exact date as to when they will be meeting, but we'll let you know that it is about remote voting and participation options. And Representative Bartholomew has a proposal on a cleanup of the rules in general. We have not seen this proposal, so we will keep you updated as we follow along with the Rules Committee. Yes.
I would just like to request that we be given minimum 24 hours notice to review the changes to the rules, unlike what happened at the beginning of the session when rules were released and we were asked to vote on them like with 30 minutes warning.
We'll absolutely bring that feedback back to leadership. And we'll also add, I don't know how much pull we will have on that one, especially since we still do not have a seat on the Rules Committee, but are welcome observers and commenters. Any other questions on the updates from leadership? Seeing none, let's talk about bill updates. I know Representative Chena has a menu of options for sign-on today and would love to review those. If others also have bills that are still seeking co-sponsorship, a reminder that today is the last day that you can turn them in for introduction. So Representative Chena, do you mind if we start with you and then we can go around the table?
No, and it was brought to my attention that, for people who might be watching for the first time, that it might be confusing what I'm doing. So I'm going to explain it for the public. So in each of these envelopes is a paper copy of a bill. This is the text of a bill printed out on a piece of paper, and then it comes with a sign out sheet. And if someone wants to co-sponsor the bill, they initial it. And this can also be done digitally. And so each of these envelopes in my binder here, it represents a bill that I'm going to be asking the caucus if they want to sign on to if they haven't already. But I think most of you may have. So this one is the Regenerative Economy Act. And what it would do is create regional people's assemblies connected to each of the existing regions of Vermont. There's 11. And the regional planning commissions would convene these people's assemblies to review the regional plans that already exist, identify the strengths of regional economies, and look at the missing the gaps and the missing links and come up with a plan to strategically fill in those links to create circular economies on the regional level that would then interconnect statewide, and that over time Vermont would engage in a just transition to a regenerative economy. So the idea is that we would transform our economy by transforming our democracy. And so this is the Regenerative Economy Act. Then there's a short form bill so I'll pass them around. So if you want to sign it, you have a chance. There's a short form bill that would create pilot projects to explore year-round agriculture in Vermont. So it would start with a few regions and then see how that goes and then expand it so that eventually the entire state would have regional year-round agriculture with the goal of being able to provide food security down the road when we face the inevitable collapse of ecosystems and food and supply chain issues, et cetera. So we might not be able to grow avocados, but we would have kale and potatoes and meat for all in Vermont. So I'll pass that one around, and then I'll save the two related to what you're here for last. This one adds 2 faculty members to the UVM board. This is being introduced on behalf of the union. It's a labor bill. It just simply adds 2 faculty members to the UVM board. This one is it's a decriminalized nature bill. What it does is it decriminalizes psilocybin mushrooms, ayahuasca, peyote, and iboga, which are plant and fungal medicines that have been used by humans for time immemorial. And it essentially says that the government should get out of the way of our birthright to these medicines that nature has provided us. So it decriminalizes them. In general, I think our caucus supports the idea that substance use should be treated as a healthcare issue, not a crime. And so it's in line with that. And then last but not least, I know this is taking a lot of space, but I haven't really done this yet the whole time. This one is, I'm calling it Say Yes to Schools and No to Prisons. It's the moratorium bill. Vermont currently has a moratorium on aiding in this construction of schools, but we want to invest a massive amount in prisons, and we're going to hear about that in a few minutes. This bill would say, putting a moratorium on prisons for 5 years, they can fix them up so that people aren't languishing in unfair living conditions, which they are right now, but we can't build new prisons. And so it places a moratorium on that. It lifts the moratorium and says we are going to help fix up our schools, essentially dismantling the school to prison pipeline. That's the idea, is like with this. So that's what this bill is. Yes to schools, no to prisons. And then last but not least, I'm calling this the Alternatives to Incarceration Act. And this is, what this bill does is it has findings, which I think we're going to cover in our discussion, about why we need to eliminate prisons and replace them with community care. And what that means, we'll dig into in a minute. So I don't want to take a lot of time on that now. But this is the bill that says we're going to start dismantling the correction system and building community care by creating a working group that's a combination of state officials, people with lived experience, and workers to come forward with a plan for a pilot project to replace the women's facility in Chittenden County with community care. And then as we do that and we learn, start trying these strategies elsewhere until we can close the last prison in Vermont and have secure residential for the people who need to be have their freedom restricted to that degree, but have most of the people who are criminal justice involved be getting services in the community and not incarcerated. So I hope I kept that simple enough, because we're going to get into that in a minute. Thank you for giving me some time on that. I don't want to take too much time from our guests, though, so I'll stop myself there.
I appreciate that. And you are right, Representative Chino. We have not gotten to hear the full breadth and depth of bills that you're bringing forward. So thank you so much for bringing these in today. Other folks want to talk about bill sign-ons that are coming.
Sure. I believe the whole Progressive Caucus is already signed on. Have you filled out the form yet?
I just sent you a text saying that I filled out the form. Catching up on emails.
Well, electronic sign-on is not the most friendly to people right now, frankly, but Representative Jubilee McGill and I are submitting our first bill ever as legislators that proposes to raise the minimum wage to a livable wage for a single full-time worker. which in 2023 is $19.45 an hour. Average in Vermont. That's how much someone would need to earn to be able to afford their basic needs as a single full-time worker if they lived on their own without a bunch of roommates or a partner. And it also would study the ideal conditions for entrepreneurship. I heard a statistic recently that Sweden has the highest rate of successful entrepreneurship on earth. And I'd venture a guess that that has something to do with people having everything they need in order to live and receive a good education, healthcare, et cetera. And then it would also create a grant program for very small business owners in Vermont that would replace the increased wages for those businesses to help keep them competitive with larger businesses in the state. So today's the sign-on date for that. And we are going to turn those signatures in at 4:30 today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Representative Logan.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Representative Mulvaney-Stanek. Glad to have you joining us here. We were just wrapping up some bill updates and didn't know if there was anything that you would like to highlight before I give a brief overview of the elections bill and what we'll be watching this week.
I think I'm going to flag just one bill that came out since the last caucus. Hi, everyone. Representative Emma Mulvaney-Stanek and Representative Small will be running the meeting, so I can actually inhale food. Thank you. I want to flag that there was a short form bill that I put in involving school safety, and it is mimicking the statewide minimum policy that we enacted under the mascot bill ending racist mascots last year, to create a minimum standard that every school district would need to follow. And the purpose of the school safety one would be to develop active shooter drill minimum policy that is trauma informed, does not involve young children, engages all of the mental health workers within our school systems, and is again really doing what is necessary, but not re-traumatizing children and staff unnecessarily, and to start that conversation. So that got introduced at some point last week, going to Education Committee, and I can find the number of people interested, but I just wanted to flag that one. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I will also, on a personal note, flag that the House Committee on Human Services is currently working on addressing emergency homelessness and trying to put forward recommendations, a plan that we have not seen from the administration around how we can address the crisis that we are still in when it comes to homelessness in the state of Vermont. That is still in the introductory phase of what that will look like, but once it has fully formed, I look forward to bringing it to this caucus, as that will be starting in human services, even though the focus is on housing. I will close this section and just reminding folks, as a previous discussion, that an act relating to miscellaneous changes to election laws is up for consideration in the House Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee this week. They will still be taking testimony tomorrow morning on this bill, and we'll have committee discussion and testimony on Thursday afternoon as well. I do not see any votes that will be considered, but with committee discussion, there is always that opportunity for a vote to come up. We will be watching this closely and expect to release a statement, another statement in the soon-to-be future to really show that there is broad support across party lines, that the intention of this bill is undemocratic in nature. And hopefully we do not have to see this come to the floor, but we will keep you all posted on that one. And with that, moving over to our guests who are here today and talking about the future of incarceration or options outside of the carceral system. Really grateful to be joined by Jana from the Free Her campaign, as well as Falco from ACLU Vermont. starting with brief introductions and overviews, would love to give you about 5-ish minutes to review your points. And we'll start with you, Jaina, and then go to Falco, and then open up for the caucus to ask questions and further discussion. Does that sound good to you?
Sounds great. So I wrote something for you all, so I'll just read it. Once again, stand up? Yeah. Oh, great. Okay. Would it be better over here, you think? Okay. I'll go
You are
over
also
here.
more than welcome if sitting and projecting this way
This
works.
is good. Okay. So once again, my name is Jaina Ossoff, and I am the Vermont campaign organizer with the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. I really thank you all for your interest in talking about this today and welcoming community advocates to come share their perspectives. So to provide some background, I am part of the council, and we are part of a national movement to end the incarceration of women, girls, trans, and non-binary people. The council was actually formed inside a federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut, and that same group of women guide our work today. So they work through policy, legal work, reimagining communities programming, the National Free Her campaign, and their international network. And their headquarters is in Massachusetts, where they have amassed an incredible people-powered movement in response to their own state's plans to build a $50 million prison. I want to begin with just highlighting their work to show that this is possible and attainable, and that they were able to actually push their version of a prison moratorium to the governor's desk in one session. It was vetoed, but they were able to mobilize thousands to direct actions and get that pushed to the desk. They also, on top of that, provide their community pantry, hydroponic farm. They have a participatory defense hub and several other programs that bring the power back to the people. So I just want to share that folks are having these discussions elsewhere, and other states are thinking about how they can move past incarceration. So I really believe we're in a pivotal moment where we can take a stand about the direction we want to move in as a society. And because of Vermont, we could really make a stand and be a leader and model in ending incarceration in this country. I believe it's time for change, and no one can deny the unproductiveness of the carceral system. We have folks coming out of prison further removed from supports like housing and jobs, and it's a huge financial burden on taxpayers. Right now, we spend around $100,000 per woman in VT alone. And just looking at those kind of costs, we could pay for rent, college tuition, treatment, and still have money left over. So also just to flag, there has been a lot of discussions about re-entry facilities instead of prisons. And what we know from women inside Vermont prisons and the main prisons, where the state is getting the blueprint from, is that the programming, jobs, and other promised supports are usually very lackluster, specifically with the staffing issues burdening Vermont's Department of Corrections and DOCs across the country. People are stuck on extremely long waiting lists for programming. Classes are consistently canceled, and women have to pay out large chunks of their wages to employers and DOC for various charges. So it's really important to ask how the state plans to adequately staff these new prisons when our current ones have so many challenges. Also important for this conversation, we can never forget about the effects on families, especially children, and the intergenerational harm caused by incarceration. They are truly the hidden victims of imprisonment, and they suffer along with their loved ones. And we can't acknowledge that there are not thousands of children in this state that are distressed by their parents being in prison. Also, it's important to recognize that these new prisons we build won't just incarcerate us, but our children, grandchildren, and these next generations to come. Especially as we sit here now and Vermont has an active moratorium on school construction, what does that translate about our priorities as a state? How can we contemplate spending $250 million on new prisons when our schools are crumbling? In an article recently published by the Vermont Digger, we learned that South Burlington High School is in disarray. The article cites that South Burlington science classrooms are out of compliance with the American Disabilities Act, but have been allowed because the rules were implemented after the school was built. And we also learned that Vermont is the only state in the Northeast that lacks an active program to fund school construction. That fund was suspended in 2007 by the General Assembly. So we should really, at the very least, try to make these changes for our children. And before I close, I just want to ask, do we believe the only way to make people accountable is through incarcerating them? Is it wrong to want to truly identify why people harm and help them get to a place where they're not doing so anymore? If we are able to address issues like poverty and substance use first, then people can then be in a place where they're able to be held accountable. This is not about letting people off easy, but requiring them to remedy the harm they caused in a way that actually heals the victims and helps the community move on. If we keep prioritizing vengeance and punishment, we will end up with completely depleted and isolated communities. The vision for abolition is to build up vibrant, whole, and strong communities. We want to see facilities in our neighborhoods with wraparound services so our people can heal with us, and so funding that is meant for harm reduction, therapy, mental health, and other supports are actually in our hands and not in the hands of DOC. People are suffering and we need to start getting creative with our solution. So please just let's take a pause and look at the way we do things. A new fancy prison may seem like the better option due to the state of CRCF, but let's try to strive for the best option and see what we can do that truly meets the needs of all Vermonters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jana. And I really appreciate the way that you highlighted where our funding priorities are. Our budgets are a moral document, and if we're not going to be supporting our schools and instead supporting a brand new prison, that it shows where our priorities are moving forward. And I appreciate having a member here who is on the Corrections and Institutions Committee, who will be taking up this debate as it comes forward. And we'll add the piece that a lot of these conversations so far have focused on the Chittenden Regional Corrections Facility, where our women's prison in the state of Vermont. And it also goes beyond to thinking about our juvenile justice system and what we do or do not have in place currently. Thank you. Before we get to questions from the table, Falco with ACLU would love to hear your remarks.
Thank you so much. I hope you can all hear me all right. Is this coming through?
We can.
Great. Well, I also wanted to highlight the fact that my associate, Indy Schoenher, is also in the room. Indy, will you wave and let people know where you are? You could come up and you want to be with me for the presentation, but if there's anything you want to follow up with after the meeting, feel free to catch Indy. I feel bad that I was not able to be there in person with you all today. I have a sick 1-year-old at home, and we've been passing him off between meetings, and also did not want to bring whatever germs he might have to you because there's enough of those floating around the State House right now. So
we appreciate it, Falco.
Yes, I really appreciate the flexibility and the ability to come before you today and be part of this conversation, because I think this is really timely right now. I think Jana did a great job highlighting many of the shared values that we have as we look at the conversation around what should our carceral system in Vermont look like. And we are at a crossroads because there are proposals being put forward which can really determine what path we go down in the future. So, speaking to the timeliness of this, there's a proposal that's going to be put forward just tomorrow in the House Corrections and Institutions Committee, which is going to give us a lot more information about where the state might be going or want to be going in terms of what this construction might look like. But what we do know already is in the capital bill, the governor's capital bill request, there's a request for $1.5 million for site selection and planning for this coming fiscal year, and then $14 million to move on, continue the project and continue moving towards construction in the year after that. So that's what's going to be in front of the legislature, and more specifically, the Corrections and Institutions Committee in just the next couple of weeks as they're working on this very complicated capital bill. But to step back just for a second and give you a bit of an idea of who we are and how we've been involved in this space, the ACLU of Vermont, we're one of the 53 affiliates of the ACLU nationally. And in 2018, we launched our Smart Justice campaign as part of a nationwide effort, with the two core goals being to reduce our prison population by 50% and to combat the racial disparities that exist within our prison system. And one thing I will say about the work that we've been doing in Vermont is we've shown that those goals are in many ways achievable. It's when we look at how many people the state of Vermont incarcerates, and in 2008, we incarcerated about 2,200 people. We currently incarcerate around 1,350 people. This is almost a 40% reduction. And so when we talk about that 50% reduction, we've gone quite a bit of the way towards that. And that is through smarter policies that we know keep communities safer and keep people out of prisons. And those are things like non-incarcerating people for minor drug offenses, making it harder for people to be reincarcerated for things like technical violations of community supervision, which was core to the Justice Reinvestment 2 initiative. And so we've worked with folks to look at the data and say there are more ways that we can safely keep people out of prison because it's a waste of human lives and it's a waste of taxpayer resources. And so the crossroads we're at right now is there's proposals being put on the table that, based off of all of the estimates that have come forward before, are based off of the idea that we're going to be incarcerating about 1,750 people, which is 400 more people than we incarcerate today, and even more people than we incarcerated at the beginning of the pandemic, without any real policy justification for why. So this brings up a number of major concerns for us that we think we need to address before we move forward with prison construction. The first is, how many people actually need to be incarcerated in this state to make sure we're all safe? And there's many more things that we can look at outside of what we've already done. Number one being sentencing reform, which is a place where the House at least has taken a lot of action in the last couple of years, passed bills to raise the felony threshold for property crimes from $900, which is lowest in the region, to what would have been the highest in the country at $2,500. Things like looking at bail reform. We are now incarcerating more people pre-trial than we have in a very, very long time. We're incarcerating approximately 400 people of the 1,350 people are being held, and they have not been convicted of a crime yet. And that has just been going up and up and up. How many people those need to be there for public safety? How can we address that? Through sentencing, bail, also through more uniformity in prosecution decisions, as well as looking at the back end of things and making sure that people have adequate supports when they're trying to reenter the community, and people aren't being incarcerated because of the lack of supports, things like lack of housing. So my higher point is, along the continuum, there's a lot of places where we can come to agreement, and the data can show us that fewer people actually need to be incarcerated now than they are. And if we look into the future, we need to be thinking about how we use, our resources. And if we're building facilities that are far too large for the population we could be incarcerating, that leads to one of two bad results. Either the first result is that we fill those facilities with people that don't need to be there, or we end up wasting taxpayer resources in building facilities that are too large for what we actually need, having to repurpose and readdress those. So that is why, as we stand right now, we're looking to try and put a pause on this and moving forward with construction until we can have a real conversation about how many people actually need to be incarcerated. And then when it gets to the facility itself, I think there's a lot of questions on what that would actually do for things like community reintegration. How supportive would this new reentry facility actually be for the people who are incarcerated there? We have a number of the same concerns that Jana raised, and as we've talked to people who've been incarcerated in the facilities in Maine, the picture's not always as rosy as the folks who run those facilities would want people to think. So there are concerns about how many people are actually getting out into the community and have the ability to work, and how it affects people and their ability to stay connected with families who might be on different portions of the state. When you do that kind of one central facility, what does that mean? And then are there community ways to better invest in community resources and community-based alternatives to incarceration that could better support people as they move to reenter their communities? Because that's what happens with the vast, vast majority. People are not being locked up. The vast majority of people are not being locked up for life, and people are going to be returning to their communities. So we need to think about how do we best support them in that, and how do we make sure that it keeps our communities stronger. So that was, I think it ran over a little bit. I apologize for that, but happy to step back and take any questions that any folks might have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Falco. I think what comes through really clearly in your testimony is that if we build it, then we're going to fill the beds. And right now, we already know that that is too high of a number. So I appreciate the pragmatic approach as well of looking really at the data that's ahead of us. And in particular, I think taking into account identities in the mix, because we also know from previous reports from the Office of Racial Equity that disproportionately Black and Brown Vermonters are incarcerated at a higher rate in comparison to the populations here in Vermont. That's enough talking on my end as well. So I look to you all to see if there are comments, questions, concerns. I'll start with Representative Hedrick and then go to Representative Chena.
Let me I just want to springboard off a little bit of what Falco was mentioning for tomorrow and what you can anticipate seeing. And this begins at 8:30 in the morning. We're hearing from the architects who've been hired to design what is being called the Women's Reentry Facility. And I guess I just want to give the lens in which I'll be looking at all of this through. So for those of you who might want to watch those meetings, start wondering the same things that I'm wondering, and we can maybe do a collective head scratch along the way. This is my worry. We're very quickly going to kind of step onto this slippery slope of kind of the lost cause, the sunken cost fallacy, meaning we're about to spend millions of dollars just on the design of this new facility, which then becomes a very easy point to make that, well, we've already spent this much money on design, we may as well continue forward with the actual construction. And I want us to look at this, and I'll be asking these questions in the committee tomorrow. We have arrived to this point because somebody in the 60s and 70s thought prison design should look like how it looks now, which is dreary and inhumane, right? We have these buildings because 50 years ago, nobody had the foresight to say, is this an okay way to treat people? And I'm worried that we're stepping onto that slope in taking these really small incremental steps that are going to lead towards another 50 years where somebody is going to stop and say, how did those decisions get made? This is still not a humane way to treat people. And this women's reentry facility is very much going to become a foothold, right? If we've built this new facility for women, we should probably build this new facility for everybody else. And we're going to just kind of keep adding on and on and on and on. And 50 years from now have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on buildings that ideally we wouldn't need in the first place. So I'm going to try to ask those questions in committee tomorrow with these architects on what does the future of incarceration look like from the perspective of the people who are building those facilities, and see if I can arrest the decision or put tap the brakes on the process by which we are about to step onto that slope. Because it's one thing to call it a design, right, and a study, but the handwriting is on the wall, and I'm not liking what it's spelling out personally.
Can I just say that we are lucky to have you on this committee? I mean, we are a caucus of 5 formally and allies and friends, but we are very lucky to have you on this committee because we could only cover 5 policy areas. And this is such a historic and important moment in our, in a generation, but these buildings will live on for generations. And I think this is a critical moment for people to really ask this is more discussion than question, but where our values align with this critical moment of those of us at the decision table this biennium need to really ask these critical questions of what is the kind of future we're building.
And Falco and Indy, please reach out sometime if you have questions that you think need to be in the room tomorrow. I'm more than happy to try and get those in there. And Janet too, I'm sorry. If there's questions that you think I need to be asking.
Representative Chena.
Yeah, well, I would start, Troy, by maybe just passing some questions on to you, and I'm happy to clarify these later. But I think just for the record, to say it in front of people, that I would like to know what feedback they have used in these designs from those who are most impacted. For example, are they gathering qualitative data from the workers and the humans living in these facilities? So the people living and working in the facilities, have they obtained any quantitative data? I would like to know, and you don't have to write this if you don't want, I'll write it to you later, but I would like to know what theories they're using behind the current designs for this infrastructure. And I also am wondering, could the expense that the state has made so far in this sort of study of design, could that be then handed off to the working group to consider when they think about community care instead of incarceration? And then this pivots to what I wanted to do, which is just give a little bit more detail to people about the alternatives to incarceration bill and what that working group would do, because it really ties together what we heard from our guests. that bill has an extensive findings section that I won't get into right now, that both of our guests referred to some of the facts about the cost versus benefit of the current system. So the purpose of this bill would be to transform the criminal justice and correctional system by eliminating the need for state-funded and operated correctional facilities through the creation of a community-based system of care and rehabilitation that reduces recidivism and promotes recovery for all individuals. And it would include accessible, equitable, and localized services throughout the whole state, secure and comprehensive housing for those in recovery and those at risk of self-harm and harm to others, stronger treatment, educational, and workforce training options incorporated into the localized and equitable residential programs, pathways to economic security by providing access to fair compensation, financial services, and capital for home ownership and small business development, and nurturing healthy relationships to assist people whose actions have contributed to the harm of individuals or the community, to assist them with repairing that harm so that they can feel like they belong and have a place in the community and not be banished. I mean, that's not the exact language, but that's the concept. So what we're proposing is that this be done through a working group, and I'm not going to give you the exact membership, unless someone really wants to know that level of detail, but it includes people with lived experience, workers and state officials who understand the sort of the levers of how things work. And they would be asked to conduct their work through a lens of transformative justice, employing restorative justice principles and trauma-informed approaches. I don't know if I've seen that language in a bill before. And that came from the Office of Racial Equity. They're really trying to have us be more conscious when we ask people who've experienced trauma from the harm of the state to come in and help the state fix it. They need to be treated with honored that they suffered, and it needs to be conducted in a way that empowers them and doesn't further disempower them. So that's important that I highlight that. And that group would be asked to come forward with a proposal for the legislature to review next year and sort of take further testimony on and then move forward on. And that plan would study and develop a plan to transition from incarceration to community care by, and this ties into what you both were saying, identifying why people are being incarcerated, okay? You both listed multiple things, so I don't want to repeat that. Identify incentives and programs that would, in community support, that would reduce incarceration. Identifying the factors that contribute to recidivism, or why people are bouncing in and out of jails and in corrections facilities. Identify any incentives or programs that invest in community supports grounded in restorative justice that could be effective. Analyze the realignment of the existing funding related to incarceration so that we can realign those resources into a fully funded system of community supports, which we do not and never have had. And that these supports be steered towards restorative justice, that we analyze the cost, benefits, and feasibilities of developing small, secure residential facilities for people who need that in the community, and that we develop a proposal for a just transition pilot project that's based in the women's facility, and this might be too much detail, so I'll try to speed it up. But in regards to the women's facility, we would ask them to look at what are the existing resources in that area? What are their gaps? How can we fill in those gaps to create a solid wraparound services? I actually call this a circle of love. And it came from my work with Sears Lane, that when people feel abandoned, we should not judge them further. We should surround them in a circle of love and hold that circle of love until they are ready to step to join us. And it comes from, I have to give credit to Mary Crow Dog in her book, talked about when she was suicidal with depression and in her Lakota Sioux culture, a person is held by the community 24/7, and everyone comes and tells them why they matter and why they love them and why they're important to them and why they shouldn't go. And they do that until the person's ready to live. And we don't do that here. We fail miserably. And so the idea here is look at that circle of love that exists and strengthen it. And then create a plan to slowly release people into the community into the circle of love. And this would include higher risk residents as we can create the secure options they need and the right kind of housing they need for success, to set them up for success. Creating plans the idea then would be to look at, as we learn from this, we start doing pieces in other facilities. So we don't wait. If it works, we start doing it elsewhere. And the idea would be to have all correctional facilities closed by 2030 and replaced with this new approach. And last but not least, recommendations for what to do for our youth, because there's problems with the state shipping youth to out-of-state facilities that are horrific right now because we closed Woodside. And there's talk about building a new facility. So we need to be thinking, what are we doing for our youth? So anyway, I think I gave enough detail for people to get an idea. I just think it's important that when we talk about ending something, we need to be clear about what is the replacement. We can't just say defund the police and not have a plan in place. If we're going to close prisons, we need to be clear. How are we going to replace them? And I think that the work we've done on this bill, it starts that conversation. So I'll stop there for other comments, questions.
Thank you so much, Representative Chena, and appreciate the full vision and that last point of we can't just end something without replacing it with something new. And the suggestions you have in that bill are much more holistic and compassionate in comparison to our current systems. And something that came up for me as you were sharing the bill is really something I appreciate about the Free Her campaign, and that it is led nationally and my assumption is locally by women who were formerly incarcerated. And wondering if you can share some perspectives that you have heard from folks exiting incarceration and how we can integrate that in this work as we are navigating the futures.
Yeah, so I'm not formally incarcerated, but we do speak to women that were in CRCF. And she was just speaking about how this new prison basically won't change the culture. Like a lot of people have this idea that just because it's a nicer place, people will be treated better, but it still has the same power dynamics. They have the same staff that don't really have the training, the trauma-informed training that they need. So we'll just see the same issues continue in a new place. That's what she was telling us. Also, that's where I learned about the wait list for programming. She said that she would constantly be on 6-month or longer waiting lists and that she didn't really get what she needed while she was in prison. And something that was especially bad for reintegration was that she only lived in Vermont for a couple months before she was incarcerated. So all her supports were developed in the prison, her friends, people she went to for like anything, So when all your supports are in the prison, that's why we believe in a community-based facility, then they would have relationships with all of us. And if they need something, we have safety nets that more of the poor incarcerated folks in our state don't have to lean back on. So yeah, just her point was basically keeping us isolated in a facility, no matter how nice, won't change outcomes. We really need to be putting that money into reentry supports if we want any kind of change.
I think that last point underscores why we see folks cycling into incarceration when your only community is within this very harmful carceral system. It's still community at the end of the day. Seeing that we have about a minute or so left in our time here, any other questions, comments that folks would like to offer? Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Jana and Falco, so much for joining us here today. And Indy, of course, in talking about what our options are moving forward, and really looking forward to hearing more from Representative Hedrick as these conversations happen in committee, and hopefully see some momentum with Representative Chena's bill this year. And with that, we will wrap up our Public Progressive Caucus today. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.